There are 50 American states. There are 535 members of Congress, nine Supreme Court justices, and a man called Chad, who's probably sitting in a hotel ballroom in Iowa right now, preparing to run for president in 2032, and nobody asked him to. Today, I'm going to do my best to explain to you the entire American government in shorthand. Now, recently you had an election over here, and by Friday morning, it was all done. The losers gave gracious speeches about being humbled, while the winners slightly act embarrassed and trying to pretend they were surprised. Bens went out on Monday like usual. But across the ocean, in the country that I left, the election never ends. It's currently been on year 14 arguing about petrol prices, and these two old men have been fighting about this since 2012. So today, we ask the question Britain has been quietly asking itself since 1776. What's wrong with that place? Is that a country or is it a sport? Or is it just one big argument with a flag stapled onto it? This is the American problem. To understand the American government, we have to go back to the 1700s. A simpler time, some might say, when teeth were optional and Britain basically owned everything in the world that wasn't nailed down. In 1776, a small group of men in waistcoats, white wigs, and what historians would describe as deeply ambitious chins decided they no longer wished to be ruled by a king over in England. The king at the time, of course, was George III, and in all fairness, he was famous for talking to trees. So you can see their point here. These men who called themselves the Founding Fathers because they were fond of being founders and had at least one dad in between each of them. Now, they sat down in Philadelphia in the heat, in those wigs, and wrote a document called the Declaration of Independence. It said, and I'm going to clearly be paraphrasing this, "We are leaving you, Britain. Um, it's not us, it's you. And please don't text our moms." Now, I want to apologize on behalf of my country for that. We were kind of going through a phase at the time. We thought we'd be back in 6 months. But after winning the war against you, partly by hiding behind trees, and which you considered that very rude, and I can imagine, the Americans were left to decide what to do next with their newly found freedom. Now, they couldn't have a king because they'd just spent 8 years explaining loudly why kings were basically rubbish. So they invented something new, something cleaner, something uh, more fair in its idea, something that 300 years later would result in a man named Cody throwing a chair at a school board meeting in Florida, basically. That's what it got us to. Now, these men wrote the Constitution. The American Constitution is a piece of paper. It's kept in a museum behind glass, like a skull of a saint or a Greg's sausage roll, just in the moonlight. Americans love this document. We quote it to you at supermarkets. We'll print it on our tea towels. We will get bits of it tattooed on our back, despite the fact that 9,000 words long includes the phrase letters of marque and reprisal. I don't really think it's a great tattoo, but sure. Britain, by contrast, does not have a written constitution. Your constitution is a series of the vibes, kind of. It was argued in a field in 1215, and plus whatever blokes added on to that over the years. And you think this is fine, and it works for you, mostly. The American government now, let's go back across the pond and I'll try to explain this system. The government there is set up into three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. You might want to actually write this down. Now, there won't be a test, so you don't have to write it down, but just to make a really muddy diagram for yourself as I try to explain this, and you can make it like one of those pictures with red yarn put to the side. Now, the executive branch is ran by the President of the United States, who is, in essence, the closest similar thing to your prime minister, but he has his own plane. Ugh. Now, the president lives in a building called the White House, which is a house that also happens to be white. And you guys like to remodel that in 1812. Good work. Now, in this White House, there are 132 rooms, including even a bowling alley. And in the building where they decide, this is where they decide if they're going to invade things, basically. Now, in Britain, the prime minister has to be chosen by members of his or her party after getting a majority. Only the people in their constituency get to vote for them personally, which is why most of you have never voted for any prime minister. So, and you're probably not going to. That's not going to change. But in America, the entire country votes for the president. Okay, well, sort of. Let's explain that now. No, I'll come back to that later. Let's finish these branches. Let's get to that. Now, the legislative branch is what is called Congress. Congress is split into two parts because Americans love everything to be split into parts, including our breakfast, our politics, and probably our feelings about Taylor Swift, too. There's two parts of the Senate. There is the House of Representatives, which is separate. The Senate itself is 100 members, and they are called, shock, shock, senators. There are two from each of the 50 states in America, and they are elected every 6 years, which is much longer than Britain has had wanted to keep any of their MPs, really. Now, senators are typically older. You might be surprised to learn. You're probably not surprised to learn that. The average age of a senator currently is deceased. They wear suits that they had last fitted in, I don't know, 1887. They say, my friend, before saying something extremely rude to each other. Now we go over to the House of Representatives, which currently is at 435 members. They are elected every 2 years, which means they spend approximately a year governing and another year asking strangers to donate money and vote for them next time. In Britain, the equivalent to this would be Parliament, the House of Commons, where the MPs actually are, and the House of Lords, where people who have done a favor for someone go to die in a leather chair. Now, your lords are appointed for life, often as a thank you for a nice fundraiser, or because they were briefly a manager of the British Rail in 1986. There is, in 2026, a man in a robe in central London who is a member of your parliament because his great, 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 great grandfather killed someone called Roger. I have lived here for a little over a year and I am not over this. I probably will never be over this. Now back, okay, the judicial branch. Let's get to that. This is the Supreme Court of the United States. 9 people in black gowns that decide what the Constitution means today. Sometimes it means one thing, and sometimes it means something else. And when a justice dies eating steak, it can mean the opposite. This is how the law is enforced and set. Now, the Supreme Court justices are appointed for life, like I said, by the president. They cannot be sacked, which means the only way they're going to leave that bench is in a box. This explains why they often look surprised in photographs. Also, you're not allowed to film inside the Supreme Court when they're doing their judging. Now, in Britain, you also have a Supreme Court. You got one in 2009 because apparently, I guess you fancied one. You saw how well it was going for us. I'm not really sure. But before that, your highest court was a few lords in a corridor, essentially. Nobody really noticed that you changed this because nobody was watching, because you were all watching the X Factor, I guess. I mean, it is pretty addictive. Now, the genius of the American system is what we call checks and balances. It's an idea we used to have, right? Now, that idea was dreamt up by men with wooden teeth and powdered wigs once again. It was that each branch of government should be able to stop the other branches of government from being too powerful. The president checks Congress, Congress checks the president, the Supreme Court checks both of them, and the result, in theory, is a fair, balanced government. Now, however, the result in practice is that nothing ever happens. Ever. Nothing. Nothing. Slow. Except the bad things, those seem to go really fast. Now, we have been arguing about healthcare in America since before the year I was even born. And I'm not going to tell you when that was, but I'm 40, so long time. But you know what? Just put it in perspective. That's when Wham was on Top of the Pops and George Michael was in a tank top. But in Britain, you don't really have checks and balances. You have one big room of shouting. If the prime minister wants to do something and the prime minister has the majority, then the prime minister does the thing he wants. Now, that might be a terrible thing, and that might be a thing involving a budget that crashes the pound and gets you replaced by a head of lettuce. But it gets done quickly. That is the big difference. This is the fundamental difference, you could say, between our two countries. Britain, bad decisions made fast. America, bad decisions made very slowly by people who openly hate each other. When I tell my cousin in Kentucky about the lettuce thing, he does not believe me. He's too young to remember when this happens. He thinks I completely have made it up, despite all these links I've sent him. Um, thinks AI. Now he just thinks it's an AI story, but it's not. There's a head of lettuce that lives on the internet still. But let's get back to how elections work or don't work. Or rather, I guess you could say the eternal election is what it feels like now. The election began in 1788 and has never ended. You have 6 weeks of campaigning, 1 day of voting here. By that Friday, you have a prime minister, and that's done. He might be getting drenched outside of number 10 in the rain, and he just says things can only get better, which in fact they often cannot. Done. Off you went. Bends out on Monday again. Completed. Cycle done. I find this, as a woman from elsewhere, almost unbearably civilized. I keep kind of waiting for the second half, you know? I keep expecting a man in a hat to come on the television and call somebody a coward or anything, but that doesn't happen. You just go back to work. Now, in America, by contrast, the election cycle never ends. The moment one president is elected, the people start running a campaign against the next one. There is currently someone in that hotel ballroom we spoke of earlier in Iowa. There's that man named Chad, and he is still planning that run for 2032. The other catch is when Americans actually do vote, we don't vote for the president directly, as many people think. We have an invented system called the Electoral College. This is where each state gets a number of points based on how big it is. And if you have the points, but not the people, well, it kind of doesn't matter. which means technically it's possible and indeed has happened for one candidate to get millions of more votes than the other, yet still lose the election. Mostly because of Wyoming or Florida, typically. Now, the Electoral College was designed in the 1700s, once again, by those men who were worried that ordinary voters might be just a little too thick. So they made a system with more complaints and swear that it was to protect us. They have not, though. In 250 years, once really legitimately considered changing this system. Now, there's also a thing you might have heard is the swing state. These are about 6 states out of 50 that actually decide the election, essentially. The other 44 just don't matter. They might as well not vote, is how many people seem to feel now. They could spend the election day in the cinema and it probably wouldn't change the outcome. Now, in a country of 330 million people, the president is essentially chosen by 80,000 people in Pennsylvania who haven't decided yet whether they even like sandwiches. I am technically one of those 330 million people. I send a ballot from London. I can do it every 4 years, and it will do nothing, but you best believe I will continuously always do it. Now, my state has voted the same way since 1972. The envelope might as well be addressed to Father Christmas at this point because you can count on it being the same every time. But now we come to, I think, one of the most strange American traditions. It's called the filibuster. Now, the filibuster is a rule in the US and in the Senate specifically. The rule states that if a senator wants to stop a law from being voted on, they can simply stand up in the Senate, in the chamber, and just start talking. And as long as they keep talking, the vote cannot happen. That is the rule. That's an actual rule. If you want to block democracy in the world's most powerful country, you just need a glass of water and a very strong bladder. Senators have used the filibuster to read telephone directories. They have used it to read receipts. They have used it to read children's books. In 2013, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who looks like a man who's just been told the soup is a little off, he got up there and he read out loud Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. Yeah, he did this for several hours on the Senate floor. And what was the bill he was protesting the vote on? Universal health care. What a evil bill. But the most famous filibuster of all happened in 1957. And this is where the funny really stops. Just for a minute. Because I should be honest about what is happening and has happened in my country. Now, this guy's name was Strong Thurmond. I learned about him in high school. He was a senator from South Carolina. He was 54 years old, deeply tanned in a way that suggests he lost a fight with a lamp, I feel like. He was strange even by 1950s American politics, he was extraordinarily racist. In 1957, the United States Congress was about to pass something called the Civil Rights Act. It was, by today's standards, a fairly moderate law. It was designed to protect the rights of African Americans so they were able to vote. In a country where almost a century after the abolition of slavery, Black citizens were still being prevented from voting by laws, by threats, and in some places, by men with guns. Now, Strong Thurmond did not want this law to pass. Shock, shock, I know, right? He believed sincerely that Black Americans should not have the same rights as white Americans. He also ran for president in 1948 on this exact platform. As you know, he did not win, thank goodness, but he still got a position of power. So he never changed his mind on that. And then August 28th in 1957, he walked into the United States Senate and he started talking. Now, stay with me. He had prepared for this. He had taken steps before to be able to go as long as possible. He said in a steam bath beforehand so he could dehydrate himself so that he would not have to go to the toilet. He had his staff get a bucket ready for him just in case. He had eaten a steak. I don't know how that's supposed to help, but sure, protein load before your races workout. He was, in his own way, a man with a plan, and he began reading the election laws that every American state had alphabetically. And then he read the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, ironically, and George Washington's farewell address. He read court rulings, and he at one point even read his grandmother's biscuit recipe, which is more like a scone for my British viewers. Now, this biscuit recipe has never been found, but it is nonetheless beloved by historians as a reference. But he kept going for hours, for more hours, and then more hours. And when he finally sat down, he had been talking for 24 hours and 18 minutes straight. He still held the record until 2025 when Cory Booker broke his record. Now, given that the people in the Senate are supposed to actually work for the people, I suppose that is kind of impressive that he went so long, but he didn't succeed. The Civil Rights Act passed the next day, the very next day. And Strong Thurmond stood and talked by himself, dehydrated, for over a day, again, about giving Black people the right to vote. He didn't want to do that, but he lost. Now, unfortunately, he went on to live to be 100 years old, of course. And even more unfortunately, he continued to serve in the Senate. He didn't die until 2003, having served as a senator for 47 years. After his death, his family confirmed something the country had long suspected, and you probably won't be surprised. Now, Strong Thurmond, the strong defender of segregation, the man who talked for a day to stop civil rights, had a daughter, and her mother was Black. She was the daughter of his family's housekeeper, who had been 16 years old when he was 22. The American government allowed that man to be senator until he was 100 years old. That is the country that I am from. And that is, in short terms, what the filibuster is used for. Now, this rule still exists in the world's biggest democracy in 2026, and any senator could use it today, tomorrow, anytime. They could stop any law any day by reading The Very, Very Hungry Caterpillar while standing at a lectern. And the world will just have to wait and listen to this. In Britain, you could not filibuster, thank goodness. Your speaker would tell you to sit down and probably nicely in your very polite way, shut up. You are in this one specific way a more serious country than mine. And this is kind of the thing that makes me want to phone my cousin and ask if I can stay here another year. I plan on staying permanently, but I think you know what I mean. In America, the president is in charge. So, well, sort of, but only in the bits that aren't run by Congress, which are split into two halves that disagree with each other while being checked by a Supreme Court of 9 people who got their job because somebody else died. Yeah, this whole thing is decided by those 80,000 people in Pennsylvania. And yeah, and a senator could stop everything by reading a recipe book for an entire day. Now, in Britain, the prime minister is in charge completely until they're not. At which point they're replaced by another prime minister, sometimes within hours, uh, often by their own colleagues, and probably the corridor of parliament. And you may have noticed that neither of these systems are one that you might call the best. They each have their ups and downs. Americans have everything written down and still fight about what it means. The British have nothing written down and still fight about what they like doing in the morning. But the thing about Americans is that we sincerely believe that we got it right. We will tell you often that when you are asking that our country is the greatest on earth, and you, by contrast, when asked about your government, you simply give a little sigh and look at your shoes, which is exactly why I enjoy living here. So, as Britain wakes up from a new election cycle that's already done, spare a thought for my cousin across the sea who does not believe about the lettuce. They are still arguing for 250 years strong. Chad is in that ballroom in Iowa while the waiter is standing next to him waiting to take the chairs down for that big run in 2032 he's going to take. Now, the elections in America will not ever end. And somewhere in a box in a museum in Washington, D.C., the Constitution quietly sleeps. 9,000 words on a piece of paper, watched over day in and day out by a security guard probably named Earl, who has not, despite spending 4 years next to it, has ever once read it. So vote, or don't vote. I think we're all going to end up replaced by a head of lettuce anyway. Do you vote? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this, do the little thumbs up, hype, all that. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. And as always, a special thanks to my members. And be sure to check out the Tudor Yank store live now.